folks one more minute to hop on. If you have a moment and you're familiar with Zoom, go ahead and type your name into the chat so we've got you logged in there. And if you're here to learn a little bit more about how you can prepare yourself and your disaster, you are in the right place. So my name is Dr. Claudia Sonder, and I am the president of the Napa Community Animal Response Team, and we've got kind of a fun evening for you. We'll give you some tips and answer some questions, and it looks like a great group, so thanks for being here tonight. Megan, you good for me to go? Thumbs up? Okay, and we are recording this meeting for people who are not able to attend, so if you have friends or acquaintances that couldn't make it, we will make this recording available. And if you don't want to be on the recording, that's fine. You can just have yourself off a video. But again, we appreciate you being here. Couple quick Zoom things just to get through the content tonight. We are going to keep most of you muted. If you have a question that we don't answer during the session, feel free to type that question into the chat. And we'll be monitoring that, and certainly we'll have some time to answer questions as we go along. And there's enough time here tonight at the end of the information to have a more open discussion. So at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a number of icons. And for those of you who are not as familiar with Zoom, you can use the chat button, which has the little sort of think rectangle there, and that's the main icon you'll use tonight. And I think that's it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. So thumbs up on the screen if you can see my image. Yeah, okay, great. So again, tonight we're going to talk about getting yourself and your animals prepared, and we're going to address companion animals, and we'll address some livestock as well. So hopefully you leave here tonight with some good projects to get yourself ready for fire season. For those of you who are not familiar with the Napa Community Animal Response Team, this is a really wonderful group of volunteers that have come together to do several things for our community. And one of them we're doing tonight, which is to reach out to the public and to animal owners and educate you on ways that you can be better prepared for some of the disasters that we have in Napa County. We also assist Napa County Office of Emergency Services and the Napa County Animal Shelter during disasters, and our volunteers are able to assist with evacuation, with shelter in place, and with taking care of animals in the shelters. And I think many of you on here tonight have volunteered for us before, and if you have, go ahead and type your name into the chat and where you volunteered or your last deployment during 2020. And that would be wonderful. We really, really appreciate our volunteers. Another part of our mission is to provide ongoing training to first responders and to our volunteers so that we can keep everybody safe out there, especially around animals who are unpredictable during disaster. And ultimately, we create a reserve of disaster service workers who have been sworn in by the county. And when you're sworn in as a disaster service worker and you're volunteering for Napa CART, you have some coverage for workman's comp if you were out there doing the work. We really stress safety in Napa CART, but again, working around animals, you just never quite know what you got in front of you. So as many of you know, in Napa, especially in Northern California, we have these new firestorms that have been happening over the last 5 years or so, and these are really unpredictable, erratic fire weather events. And when you talk to CAL FIRE, you talk to people that are having to deal with these storms, oftentimes they have to go into a a life-saving mode as opposed to a property defending mode, because these fires are so large scale and so fast moving that the ability to defend a home becomes really impaired. So a lot of work can go into your home ahead of fire season to try and make it more resistant to burning, and also to get you what you need and all the equipment you need in place to get your animals out safely. So in California, what are our risks? Our main risk is fire, and a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is fire prevention and also preparedness. But we do flood in Napa, we have earthquakes, and we have the potential to have prolonged power outages if we have some additional power safety, public safety power shutoffs this season. Those are highly likely. So one of our goals for you tonight is start to think about what your red flag day routine is going to be. So the county will often issue a red flag day warning when all the conditions are right for fire to take off. And usually that's going to be a combination of wind, low relative humidity, and high fire fuels in the environment. Sometimes it'll also be a combination of the potential for dry lightning strikes. And luckily, over the last 5 years, the majority of the big fires that we've faced, including the Valley Fire, which I think was for many of us our first introduction to a firestorm, those events occurred during red flag days. So having a red flag day routine is a very smart way for you to just be ready in case you have to leave quickly. You know, when we think back over the last 6 years, really, and we look at the list of fires that many of us have endured, we've learned a great deal. And although these events do occur on red flag days, they often occur at strange hours of the day, very early in the morning with the glass fire. Valley Fire was middle of the day. Our wine country fire started at 9:50 at night. And depending on the time of the day, you may or may not be home. And this is one thing you really need to think about. If you're going to be out and about during fire season, or especially on a red flag day, who is the person that can get to your animals if you're not home? And part of our goal is to get you thinking about that and making connections with neighbors or friends or people within Napa CART, make some phone calls and try and arrange a situation where if fire struck in your neighborhood, you would have someone to call if for some reason you could not get back to your animals. Another thing we'll talk about tonight is having a plan to leave, because people can get trapped, especially up in the hills. And so we encourage you to leave early. And it can be very difficult to reunify with your animal if the animal is left behind in a fire. It's incredible how resilient animals are, and we're going to talk about that. But our goal for you is to have all the systems in place that if the worst were to happen and you had to leave animals behind, that they'd be in good shape to be reunified with you. And again, that's a last resort. One of the most important things about having a plan for animals and having a cart and all of the animal boards working together is that we know that the human-animal bond is one of the most powerful components to healing and resilience for our community. And I think all of us have experienced those events, either ourselves or looking at video where people have lost everything, but their pet made it. And that's such an important thing for our community, that we have that resilience and that we can heal. And so all of you that are here tonight, that are taking the time to prepare for your animals, it's really important for their well-being and for yours. So we'll talk a little bit about stages of preparedness, and tonight we'll concentrate primarily on individual, meaning let's get you all prepared. It's really helpful to have a neighborhood program, so we'll talk a little bit about ways you can reach out to your neighbors, and that helps you if you're not home and something happens. Your city and county has done a great deal to enhance preparedness for Napa. I would say that we are incredibly fortunate to have the leadership that we have in Napa County when it comes to the support that the CART has had and that Napa County Animal Shelter has provided. So our leaders are invested in all of you and your animals, and that's a beautiful thing. Our first responders also need to be prepared for their interactions with animals in evacuations and after fires have come through. And again, we have a wonderful leadership in Napa County, and the Sheriff's Office, CAL FIRE, our volunteer fire organizations, they understand what the role of the CART is, and they also understand the value of preserving animal life and human life. So we live in the right area for that. And then lastly, we have to look at what's happening at the state and national level with the animal component of disaster response. It's never really been well formalized, and certainly there are no standardized training programs or deployment programs yet in the state, but there's a really wonderful group of CART leaders that are working on that. And there has been some talk of trying to get the PETS Act amended to include livestock and funded across the nation. So stay tuned for that. So this picture here is my ranch on the night that the wine country fires burned in 2017, and the whole sky is lit up behind me. And I was not prepared for a fire like that. And this list that you see in front of this home preparation list, is something that I want you all to think about. Do you have updated insurance, or are you aware what your home is insured for? I can tell you that my home was only insured for about a quarter of its value, and had it burned down that night, we would not have been able to rebuild what we have, never mind improve anything. So make sure and check in with your broker and just understand what your coverage is. If you can, take the time to, with your phone or with a video camera, to walk into each room of your home and do a narrated tour of the contents of your home. And that's a great way, if you were to lose your home, to verify what you had in there. If you can, you should archive your vital documents, and you want to do that in a safe way. But even fireproof safes in the 2017 fires, they didn't burn, but they incinerated the contents. So when people went back into their fireproof safe, the safe was intact, but the contents were gone. So if you have a way to archive your vital documents, whether those be passports or birth certificates or titles, another option is to get those things into a safe deposit box in a bank, and then you are less likely to lose those in a fire. It is important more and more to have some sort of either backup battery or generator that you can use when we do lose power, or if you do lose power in a fire and you lose your ability to pump water. Those of you that are on a city water system, this is less important, but for many of us in the country that are on wells, when the power goes, your water goes, and that can affect your ability to defend your home, and it can affect your ability to keep your animals hydrated. So look into options for backup power. It's really important, if you live in the country, to have a chainsaw and to understand how to use a chainsaw, and if you can, get some chainsaw training, because if you're trying to flee down Soda Canyon or down Atlas Peak and there's a tree in your way and you can't get out, having a chainsaw in your vehicle can make the difference between life or death. And I know that there are many very scary stories of people not having the ability to leave because of trees down. Chainsaws are incredibly dangerous, and they're not for everybody, but be thinking about what you would do if you had a tree down in your way trying to get out. Sprinklers on the roof is a really great way to deal with red flag days. I can tell you at our ranch, on red flag nights, especially if it's windy, we go ahead and we sprinkle the roof for about an hour before we go to bed. It's just that extra peace of mind. And if embers were to burn or fly through the air, you'd have the ability to mitigate that impact. And there are some great sort of A-frame or A-line heavy-duty sprinklers for sale that can do the trick. That by this time of year, you want to have all your gutters cleaned out all the brush and leaves from the fall out of there, and make sure that your gutters are clean, because embers into gutters are one of the top ways that we have homes ignite. And unfortunately, ember fly in some of these firestorms can be 1.5 miles. That's a long way. So taking the time to get up there and clean it, and you're not allowed to fall off your roof when you go up there. So just be sure that whoever's going up there is someone with good balance, and that you have some safety systems in place. There were several head traumas on the night of the 2017 wildfires. Queen of the Valley was actually busy with head trauma because there were people who fell off their roofs trying to get sprinklers up. So be careful with that. Have some plan for communication. A radio, a crank radio or something that can work without power, so that you can stay tuned to what's going on if the communications infrastructure goes down in a fire. Defensible space, we all know this is really important. Try and keep any ladder fuels down, have a 10-foot distance between the grass and the bottom branch on the trees. Try and keep anything off your porch on red flag days. Take your cushions out off the porch, and any rugs that are on the floor, anything that's outside that an ember could fly to and combust, get those things put away where they're not going to put your home at risk. And there's some great websites that you can tune into, readyforwildfire.org. We'll talk about several more, and we will make this presentation available to you if you missed some of these links during the presentation. For those of you that have a barn or that have out structures with animals, realize that the barns can ignite. There's sort of between the bedding and the wood and the way that they're constructed, unfortunately, they're prone to fire. So have a plan for your barn and post that plan. What is the evacuation route? And then practice it. You want to have hoses staged. You want to have fire extinguishers in your barn and know how to use them. Ideally, you want to store your hay remotely. It's not a good idea to store hay in a barn where animals live, because hay ignites very quickly and it's very hard to put out. It takes, I think, 4 times the amount of water to extinguish fire in a hay fire than it would just in a structure fire. You want to have your defensible space. If you can bulldoze a 30-foot perimeter around your property, again, that helps with embers. It helps prevent the grass from bringing fire in. Realize that your creeks are a wick for fire to come into, and there are environmental laws about how you can manage your creeks. So talk to somebody about that if you do have a creek going right by your place, so that you can mitigate those risks. Horses, in particular, have been known to run back into barns, even burning barns, during a fire. So it's important, if you have a barn, that you have a barn door, so that in a fire you can close the barn door, get the animals out so that they can't get back in. And then ideally you have a perimeter fence around your property, so that if you had to let animals go, like in this situation on the slide where you've got too many animals to evacuate in front of that fire, at least you can close up your barn. You can open up all your gates inside your property and hopefully have a perimeter gate closed. We don't let horses loose onto the road, because you can kill humans that are trying to flee from fire. A horse on the road will kill a family in a car. So we don't recommend doing that, and that's why it's important to consider ways that you can perimeter fence your property if you do have horses or livestock. It's ideal if you can have pictures of your animals and feed instructions posted in your barn, so that if you have to leave and you can't get back, a CART volunteer or other volunteer will have very clear instructions about what to do with your animals. And we'll talk about that pet information sheet. We've got some examples of that a little later in the presentation. Ideally, you should have water sprinklers in your barn if you can, again, because of the propensity for barns to go up pretty quick. Have a headlight and leather gloves available in the barn. And on red flag days, I actually take my headlight and a pair of leather gloves and I put them in the front seat of my truck. My truck is hooked up to my trailer and they're facing out. And that way, if I have to run out in the middle of the night, I know exactly where to go to get my headlamp and my gloves. And you don't want to have to be carrying a flashlight when you're dealing with your animals. You want to be able to put on a headlamp and have your hands free. You want to have a way to identify animals in the barn, either leather halters with a name tag, or we'll give you some examples of some mane clips and other things you can attach to the animals. And these are all good tips if you're trying to get your barn ready. Here are some pictures of some really nice clip-on tags that are available for livestock owners that can either go onto a leather collar on a goat or that can go onto a leather halter on a horse. The reason we like to use leather is that if the animal were to become entangled in something, leather will break and it doesn't tend to heat up and burn like some of the synthetic materials. When we talk a little bit more about our red flag day routine, one of the things we do recommend, especially with horses, is that fly masks be removed and fly sheets be removed. Anything that can combust should be taken off the animal, but a leather halter can stay on, and these tags, you can fill them out. Hopefully most of you, if you have small animals or companion animals, you've had them microchipped. We can also microchip horses and we can microchip dogs. And this is really an important thing to do for all of you as a key step in preparedness. You do need to register the microchip with the company that sells the microchip, so that if somebody scans your animal, either coming into a shelter or if it's found out on the street after a fire, they can identify your animal with you. If you just microchip the animal and you don't register it with the company will have that they dispensed that or sold that microchip to a veterinarian, but they won't have your contact information. So that's an important step. Talk to your veterinarian, talk to your humane society. Jameson Humane just did a beautiful microchip clinic this past week with some horses. Napa Humane does wonderful work with microchipping. And we do work very closely with our animal partners here in Napa County. We have Wine Country Animal Lovers. We have Sunrise Horse Rescue, Jameson Humane, Napa Humane. These are all great orgs that will help you get a microchip if you're not in a position to do that, or if you're unable to. So reach out to some of these orgs if you need help. Napa County Animal Shelter does really great work, and they're all our allies in this task of getting you all prepared. You'll see there's some other options here. We do like to use luggage tags for crates. So if you have an evacuation crate, you can fill out your luggage tag ahead of time and you can already have that on your crate. And that way someone would know how to reunite you with your animal if the animal gets dropped off in a crate. And we've even seen people write on the animal either with spray paint or Sharpie on hoof or horn, initials. These are all options for you. One thing that we all need to be prepared for is the prospect of losing power this summer. It's actually, knock on wood, pretty amazing that we didn't lose power today, but I guess that could still happen, so we'll see. So remember that many of you have gates or garage doors that are dependent upon electricity to work. And so you'll remember that during the 2017 fires, and actually I think during the Valley Fire as well, there were people who could not get their cars out to leave because they had no power and they couldn't get their garage doors up. We also find that many of the electric fences or gates to properties work that way. So make sure that you have a way to operate those very important exits without power. Again, you want to have your lighting by your bed and have some extra flashlight lights and headlamps around your house so that if power goes down and you have to go do something, that you have light readily accessible to you. Remember that electric fencing isn't going to work when power's down unless it's solar, and your automatic waterers aren't going to work. So those of you that are have automatic waterers that are not gravity fed, you're going to need a different way to handle things. And one of the things that we recommend on red flag days is that you go ahead and you fill troughs for your animals in anticipation that you're going to be without power for a couple days. A good rule of thumb in weather like today is an average horse is going to drink about 20 gallons a day. If you can buy one 500 or 100 gallon trough for each horse you own, and you can fill those on red flag days, you will have enough water for 5 days for each horse. That's great planning. If you don't end up using it, you can use it to water your garden. You can use it to do something else, but I do recommend that you stock up on water. Same thing for your companion animals at home. Obviously, they drink considerably less water, but if you have a large breed dog, they can go through a gallon of water a day. And so it's a good idea to have water bottles for you and water bottles for your animals that are available to you if power goes down. You want to have access to your veterinary supplies. Don't get yourself run so low on medications that if we were to have a disaster and you couldn't get into your vet for 5 days or 6 days, that you'd be out of meds. So try and plan ahead and reorder meds when you're still have a week or two left. And it's really important during these disasters, especially the firestorms, to monitor the air quality index. And you'll hear about that in the news. You actually, if you have an iPhone, it'll report your AQI every day under weather if you put Napa in. And the rule of thumb for air quality index is that once it gets to 150, it's actually unhealthy to do any kind of exercise outside. And you'll see schools will close sports programs at 150. That's their threshold. I tell people, don't exercise your cells and don't exercise your animals if your AQI is greater than 150. And if you have sensitive animals like Rambo here, who's a little brachiocephalic French bulldog, that shortened little nose, it's cute, but it's not what nature had in mind. And so that a dog like that, or a pug or a boxer, they can really have trouble cooling down on hot days because they don't have a normally functioning upper airway. So those kind of animals, you need to keep them cool. Don't let them overheat. They can really get into trouble. Rabbits also are very, very susceptible to hot weather. And if you can't cool them down, many people will freeze the little plastic water bottles, and you can put those in with them so that they can huddle up to those on a day like today. Those of you that have koi at home, you know that you need power to aerate koi. And if they're in a shallow area and they don't have aeration for, I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is, but it doesn't take a long time for them to run out of oxygen in those shallow pools, especially if it's hot, and then you lose your koi. So have a backup plan for your koi when power's down. Those of you with companion animals, Napa CART is working with the Napa Valley Community Foundation and the David and Jane Gotelli Fund. They did award Napa CART with about 150 airline crates, and we've been handing them out to seniors with pets, and here they are staged in our barn over at Napa Valley Equine. So if you know a senior that does not have an evacuation crate for their animal, you can email info@Napa CART and we can get them hooked up with a crate. The evacuation kit also has a water bowl in it. It's got a luggage tag that they can fill out. It's also got a liner for a pet identification sheet, which is we'll go over in the next slide, but it's a way for somebody that's taking care of your animal to know exactly what they need, and also to be able to reunify you with them because it has a current picture of your pet with you. And then you can see the other items in those evacuation kits. Probably the most important thing for all of us is to realize that if we're going to evacuate with pets, it takes more time. It's not as easy to just grab your family and your go bags. You have to get your pets, and you have to get them in crates, and you have to have enough room for everybody. And so a really smart thing to consider when you have multiple pets is to have somebody outside of the area that can be an evacuation destination for you, either out of town or in the middle of town where they're less likely to have a problem. And then on a red flag day, you call that person and you say, hey, it looks like I may need to come on over. And you can actually just head over and spend the day there, or leave your pets there for a couple hours if it's nice and cool and you're out of power and they have power. So be thinking about who that could be in your life that could be a destination for you if you just want to get your animals out early, and then you can always go back and wait it out, but at least they're out of harm's way. On the left here, we have my patient information sheet. That's Smokey, my dog, and it has his veterinarian's number. It has the medication that he's on. It talks a little bit about how excellent he is, that he's giant and he looks really big, but that he's very kind. It says what his diet is, and it has a current picture of us both, so that if we were to be separated and I were to go to a shelter and find him, I could say, look, this is me and him, and we belong together. We have a template for these sheets. We can either email them to you, and then we like to put them in a little binder like you'll see on the right there, or we can give you you can buy a little clear sleeve, like a report cover sleeve, and you just put it in there. And then on red flag days, that goes out on the counter or out near your pet food, so that heaven forbid, if you're not home and a fire comes through or you can't get home because of an earthquake or whatever the disaster is, someone can go into your home and they will have a very clear roadmap of how to take care of your animals. So I do encourage you to make one of these for each animal, and then every year you can update it, or every 6 months or so you can update it as you see fit. These are fun projects for kids to do at home too. And then you'll notice in that slide to the right that I also have several days of dog food. I've got current medications, I've got leash, I've got water, I've got a large water bowl for him because he's big. That is certainly not his crate. That is for one of my cats. But having all these things staged on a red flag day is a really good idea. Now realize if you have cats, your cats are going to see that crate and they are going to leave. They don't want anything to do with that crate. So a really good idea over the next few months is to pull that crate out once a week, put something delicious in there, whether that's some cat food or something that they don't normally get, and just leave the door open. Don't even try and catch them, and let them go in and out at their own will until they've learned to associate that crate with something delicious. On a red flag day, if you've got kind of a skittish cat that you know the moment it senses your tension, it's gone under the bed or it's going to be gone somewhere where you can't get it. On a red flag day, bring that animal in and keep it in a small room somewhere. Put its litter box and its food in there so that you could get it quickly if you need to. During the glass fire, many people got the call to evacuate while it was still dark out with no power, and they just simply couldn't get their cats out. And that's why there were so many cats that were left behind in the glass fire. So realize that you're not always going to be able to get them out, but it makes a lot of difference if the cats are familiar with a crate and if they don't go running away when they see one. Small animal individual preparedness sheet. You'll see here, this is sort of a list of, and we've already covered some of this, but this is a nice comprehensive list of what you can have ready to go for your small animals. Things you don't even think about, like having some extra baggies, some trash bags, hand wipes, making sure that you have a place to go, and that you know where the shelter is if for some reason you need to bring your animal to the shelter. Occasionally we have situations like in the glass fire where you can't get out with your pet for whatever reason. We've had people call and the fire's at their back door. And by all means, human safety is always the priority. So if you find yourself surprised by a fire, which many of us have, don't take the time to try and gather animals. Do take your family and leave safely. There are a few quick things you can do. You can throw up the lid of the toilet. You can open a window or a door and leave it open. Realize that you may lose your cat to the outdoors, but they still have a better chance of surviving if they're not left in the house or locked in the house. So we don't recommend that you leave animals in the house when a fire is near and approaching, because their chances of survival are much more remote under those circumstances. If you have a collar on the animal, awesome. If you have some sort of ID attached. If you have perimeter fencing, this applies more to dogs and livestock. You can as we said, open the door, but go ahead and make sure your perimeter fencing is closed. And occasionally you will have to do that. Now, one very interesting thing we've learned over the last several fires is that Weber's and barbecue equipment does not tend to burn in these fires. So if you have a little stash of some pet food and water that you can put in those of your animal's food, if something were to happen to your house, the people that come, whether that be CART for shelter in place or other, could actually have continuity of food right up there with your animals. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I can't tell you how many Weber's and barbecues survive in a disaster. So if worse comes to worse, part of your red flag routine is to throw a little bit of food and water in there so that people could come through afterwards and at least get them started on what they're used to eating. Again, we have here a couple more great websites that you should get to know, and you can have them in your favorites in your toolbar. These are PG&E hosts both My Wildfire Alerts and Wildfire Safety, and they have wonderful tips on there. That third link, alertwildfire.org, that's a North Bay camera system, and there's several cameras mounted in Napa Valley now. And if you smell smoke, if you're not sure what's going on, if you hear a lot of commotion, sometimes going to these sites will help you to have a better understanding of what's going on. And I've found that very useful when I'm not quite sure where the fire is or what's happening. Again, when we're preparing for power down, we need to make sure that we have the ability to keep our large animals hydrated. If we have to, if we know that we're going to have to load up and evacuate, and you have access to block ice or ice, sometimes it can make a real difference to these animals that are going to have to sit in a trailer for a while. Obviously, we don't ever want to leave animals in a trailer unattended, or dogs or cats in a car unattended. As you know, the temperatures can become very unbearable within minutes of the car being stationary and without air conditioning. So having an extra cooler, having the ability to keep meds and food and water cool is a great idea. And then having fuel for your generators if you have a fuel generator. Many of you probably have propane generators at this point, and somewhere to go. So this again is a list for you to be thinking about. If power is going to go down and you have animals, how do you keep them cool? How do you keep yourself cool and safe? Large animals, similar list here. Ideally, you want to have recent pictures or a pet ID sheet. Any pertinent veterinary history. Microchip your horses if you can. If they're not microchipped yet, call your veterinarian. We can get that done for you. It's very simple. It takes 5 minutes. Little local anesthetic. They handle it really well. And then again, having luggage tags that are pre-filled out that could be braided into a mane with a little elastic on the end, 3 loops of a braid through a luggage tag and elastic. There you go. You've got a tag on your animal if you need it to, if you have to let it loose, or even if you're hauling it, you've got immediate identification when it gets to the shelter. And then with large animals, it's helpful to have a duffel kit, duffel bag that has some of the equipment that can be helpful when you're dealing with large animals, and you'll see that supply there. Little first aid kit, again, having access to light and being able to address a wound or attend a wound. Lacerations are one of the #1 things we see in the shelter. So horses do get hurt, livestock do get hurt during evacuations, and being able to at least get some pressure on a wound while you're traveling is a great thing. And then having enough food and water for that animal for the short term is really important. Looks like we're doing okay on time. We could stop here for a minute if anybody has any questions. I don't know if anything's come up in the chat.
Nothing's come up in the chat, but yeah.
Anybody have any questions you want to type in the chat? Now's a good time to do it, and we'll pick them up. We're going through this kind of quickly, but again, we can have these lists and slides available for you. If you're interested, you can contact us at info@napacart.org, and we're happy to get this up and available for you. Some of this is on our website too. If you go to napacart.org and you go to the preparedness page, you'll see some of these lists here there as well. For those of you that haul livestock or horses, we do really recommend that you inspect your trailer, ideally every 6 months. If that trailer's been sitting out back for a year and you haven't taken it for a spin, you don't want to test its suitability on the night of a fire. So you want to make sure that your tires are in good shape and not cracked, that your floorboards are healthy enough to bear the weight of multiple horses, your latches and hitch are healthy, that you have the lighting that you're going to need in the middle of the night, that your escape hatches are working. Red flag days, you'll see beautiful emails from Megan Van Kooteren, our operations manager, that remind you to fuel up, to hitch up, and to park facing out. I usually will actually load my horses up on red flag days just to kind of go through that routine, load them up, shut them in there for about 3 minutes, unload them, give them a treat. It's a great experience for them. And it's uneventful, so it's positive. It's positive reinforcement for hopping right on. Again, we talked about the importance of having a chainsaw if you are somebody out in a remote area where you might have to get by a down tree. Jumper cables are a huge thing. Some people we've had this happen actually, not personally with CART, but we've heard stories of evacuation vehicles being left running and running out of battery, and then all of a sudden you're out there and you need to jump a vehicle when you're in a fire area. So having this access to the list of equipment that's here is really important when you are hauling livestock.
Claudia?
Yes.
There was one question that came up in the chat. It's asking about Coggins test.
Yes.
No, I think Nancy may be answering it in the chat, but anyway.
Coggins is actually someone's last name, but what a Coggins test is it's a negative test for equine infectious anemia. And many of you who own horses and show them or take them out of state know that you have to have a negative Coggins test to cross state lines or to go to shows. We do not currently require a negative Coggins test for a horse to enter a shelter because the time that they're together is pretty minimal. Equine infectious anemia is spread by mosquitoes and by biting flies. And so you don't often need to have a negative Coggins test to evacuate a horse out unless you are crossing state lines or unless you're going to a fairgrounds. Fairgrounds will often require them, but not always. So great question. And then again, really one of the most important things we want you to be thinking about in this horrifying picture here is that sometimes the way you would normally leave your property is not accessible and you can't get out the way you normally would. So we always want you to have evacuation plan A and evacuation plan B. What is your plan if your main exit route is cut off? And what is your plan if you can't get your animals off? And we call that a burnover plan. And that is something that we've had to talk people through many times during these fires, fires at the back door, what do I do? And with livestock in particular, ahead of time, if you've cleared your ladder fuels, if you've disced up an area 30 feet around your property, if you've got a good perimeter fence, then horses are really good at evading fire if they have enough room to get away from fire. So at this point, for me, it's been 9 fire responses that I've been involved with since 2015. And the times when I found animals that were killed by fire or badly burned by fire, 9 times out of 10, those animals were confined in some way. There was one instance in the Valley Fire where that was a fire tornado in the part that we were in, and those animals, I actually believe that the oxygen was pulled out of the air for those animals because there were birds that had fallen from the sky in that area as well that were not burned. So there are circumstances under which nothing can survive, but in most cases, if you have to leave animals behind, as long as they have enough room to get away from fire, they can. And again, it's human priority. So our burn over protocol is to shut the barn doors, make sure your perimeter fencing is intact, fill up as many troughs as you can, take any equipment that's on the horse off, any fly sheets, any type of blanket or mask. Throw some hay, make sure there's hay accessible, make sure that the grain is not accessible, that the grain is ideally locked up somewhere so that if they are loose, that they're not going to make themselves sick on something. And then as you're leaving, you get yourself out safely, and then you make a phone call to either the animal shelter or to Napa CART to let them know that you've left animals behind. And that holds true for all species, whether that's your dog or your cats or your livestock. Once you're out safely, go ahead and make that phone call so that we can be alerted. What we did in the glass fire is that as calls came in, if we already had teams that were out, we would add that address to their list. So animals were attended to on the first day that they were left behind if needed and were retrieved. So please prioritize your own safety. There are systems in place to go back and get animals, and we're very fortunate here in Napa to have great support from local law enforcement. They'll let us do that when it's safe to do it. They won't let us out there when it looks like this on the slide. And of course, that makes good sense because we all are going to prioritize human life. Some language you'll hear sometimes in these evacuations is you'll hear an advisory evacuation versus mandatory evacuation. And of course, mandatory evacuations can vary from county to county. What does that mean and how mandatory is it, right? We always encourage you to leave under a mandatory evacuation. And if you have multiple pets, or if you are a senior, or if you're going to need more time for whatever reason, then we recommend that you leave under advisory evacuation. When a evacuation is advisory, there won't always be shelters set up. Shelters only tend to go up under a mandatory evacuation. So realize that if you're leaving under advisory evacuation, you may not have a shelter to go to. That's why we really encourage you to have a buddy or a friend, an acquaintance outside of town or in the center of town. And that person is the person that you call when you want to leave. You call them on a red flag day, you make that plan, your animals are all set up. And if nothing else, it's a drill for you and your animals to get in the car, get away, go be somewhere cool where you're not stressed, where they're not stressed. And when the evacuation order is lifted, then you can go back home. As we learned in the glass fire, there are many, many hundreds of chickens in the eastern hills of the Napa Valley. And so if you do have chickens, realize that the best option for a chicken is to be let out of the coop. If you leave them in the coop and the fire comes through, then it's almost certain that they won't make it. If you let them out of the coop and the fire comes through, it is almost certain that you may lose one or two to predation. So that's the hard part, is it's a gamble either way. But in my experience, they do much better when they are let out. If you have a way to gather your chickens ahead of time, and I've got mine trained to come when I call them and load up, I just use some treats and it's amazing, they come flying. So if you can load them up and you've got a small number of them, you can put them in a dog crate or a couple of crates, and you can haul them to somewhere and keep them cool, and they can stay in that crate all day as long as they're cool and they have water. Or if you have a friend or acquaintance that is willing to house your chickens during a fire, that's great. What we don't tend to do in Napa is take chickens into shelter, because the moment you start sheltering chickens, you start spreading infectious disease, and you're actually more likely to harm your chicken in a shelter, in my opinion, than you are leaving it out at your home or getting it to a place where you can take care of it with an acquaintance and not in the shelter. So see if you can train up your chickens. Those freeze-dried mealyworms that they sell at the feed store are just the best candy in the world, and they will learn to come if you call them and you feed them that. And then you can load them up and get them somewhere safe. Remember that chicken feed is toxic, especially to ruminants, but also to horses in any quantity. It can just dramatically drop the pH of their gastrointestinal tract and lead to some very serious complications, including death in small ruminants and laminitis in horses. So don't leave your chicken feed where other animals with hooves can get to it. Ideally, that needs to be locked up in a shed or somewhere where they can't get to it. If you do have exotic animals, you want to leave very specific instructions on your pet information sheet so that a cart or somebody coming in would know how to care for them and what they need. We already talked about the fact that koi will need aerification in their ponds, and of course many snakes and lizards do need a heat lamp in order to even digest their food. So have a plan for your exotics, and the same applies. If you can get them to a home of someone who is willing to kind of take them in for a period of time, that's the right way to go. In that wheelbarrow you see to your right is a 200-pound tortoise that came out of the hills in the 2017 fires. Speed Bump was that tortoise's name, and it was I think about 80 years old, and we had to, as you can see, cart it out of there, no pun intended. That is a down power line that you're looking at. We had safed that site. We had information that those power lines were dead. That's the only reason that we are there doing that. So we don't encourage anybody to go under a power line, but under those circumstances, we were working with Napa County Animal Services, and they were able to escort us up. We had to hike in about a mile to get that guy, and that's why you see us wheeling him out there. But there are some strange animals in this valley, so if you are the proud owner of one of them, make sure that you have some good instructions left for us, and either get out with your animal or call if you have to leave it behind with some specific instructions of what that animal might need. One really smart thing you can do as far as getting prepared for this fire season is to, if you haven't already done it, reach out to your neighbors. Talk to them a little bit about the fire season, check in on them, make a plan to all check in on red flag days. You can have a little sort of local area where you all agree to meet if infrastructure goes down. And then you can have a little WhatsApp or group text where you can talk to each other during disasters. In this day and age, so many of us have gotten out of the habit of communicating with our neighbors, and your neighbors can really be your very best friend when it comes to fires. I can tell you over and over again, in the Valley Fire and the Wine Country fires, and even here in the Glass Fire, it was neighbors who got animals what they needed in the first 24 to 48 hours while everything was unraveling. So if you can establish a relationship with someone such that if you're not home and the earthquake hits or the fire hits, that you have that ability to call that neighbor's been to your house, they know your animals, they know where your supplies are, they know exactly what to do, the animals met the neighbors loaded the horse, you know, whatever those circumstances are, you're going to do so much better. And the peace of mind that brings is really something. When you realize that you can't get there, but you've taken the time to make sure someone else can, that is a true form of relief. If you have elderly in your neighborhood, a senior that has pets, check in on them, see what their situation is, offer to help if you can, if you have those resources so that you can get them out early. If you can get them out under under advisory, and you can get them to a cool spot that you've prearranged, that's really the ideal. And then you want to just make sure you maintain your kits and your equipment. Sometimes you can pool things like generators, water tanks, trailers, depending on who has what in your neighborhood. And really make a habit of practicing that outreach and staging on a red flag day. This was a beautiful little Leadership Napa Valley project that happened. I think it was 2 years ago. The Napa Neighbor Network was established, and this is an example of one of the magnets that they put out. It's got all the pertinent numbers on it, but it also had a place where you could put your neighbors' phone numbers, and you would have that right there. And I can tell you, at my little place on Silverado Trail, our neighbors to the south and neighbors to the north on red flag days, we do a little text. We check in with each other. If any of us are going out of town, we let each other know. We give, I give my neighbors' phone numbers to a caregiver that's staying at my place. Like, it's just a great way to have that safety net if you're out of town and something happened. And so to sort of summarize what we'd love to see you all do here tonight is to take some of these tidbits and go now over the next few weeks and put together your kits and make a plan for your animals. You can get your go bags, you can get your info sheets done. If you need a template, let us know. If you email info@, we can get one up. And I think we could probably get one up on the website too, Megan. I'm just thinking out loud, that someone could download easily. And then if you haven't already taken CERT training, CERT is just an amazing learning experience for anybody that owns a home. Never mind whether you're taking care of animals or involved in animal disaster, you're just going to learn so much about how to be safe around your home, what to do in a disaster, light first aid, splinting, some real life-saving information. That's a picture of Ken Arnold there. He's the leader of CERT in Napa, and there's several other wonderful CERT leaders in our area. And CERT helps Napa CART to deploy during the fires. They handle the communications for us. They handle the command center. They're just an incredible partner. And if you wanted to become a Napa CART member, basically what we ask is that everybody enroll in CERT. It's a great place to start. And then we build your training off of that. And there's more information about Napa CART at napacart.org if you're interested in joining. Drill on red flag days. We've given you some things to do. Host a neighbor meeting. We're out. We're on the other side of this pandemic. It's a nice time to start reaching back out, if for nothing else, because you haven't seen your neighbor in a year or so, and have a conversation about disaster and how you can be helpful to each other. If you have a senior in your area, take the time to introduce yourself and offer that assistance, or make sure that they're at least connected with a family member who could help them if an evacuation order came through. And really, those are the main things that will help you to be prepared for the next disaster. So now we have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions about this or needs any clarifications on what we've talked about. Anything in the, I can't see the chat from my view, but if there's anything there, Megan, you can let me know.
Yeah, nothing yet, but I'll chime in if something pops up.
Okay. Great. So a lot of information there. Again, feel free to reach out if you have questions. If there's anybody on the training tonight that has a great tip that we didn't cover or something that's worked really well for them in the disaster period, type it into the chat and we can unmute you. And if you want to share a tip that's been great for you, let us know, because we all learn in these disasters and we can help each other by shared experiences. I can tell you that personally, having a red flag day routine actually calms me down. If I know that one's been declared and I can walk around my home and have everything where I want it, it allows me to kind of take a deep breath and at least know what's going on. And I do have livestock on my ranch, and because of my obligations to Napa CART, if the weather's really unruly, I'll actually get my animals off my property. I get them to a more central location. I have a nice relationship with someone who will do that for me, and that way I can attend to my responsibilities elsewhere and I don't have to worry about my animals at home. So just sharing that little tidbit of what calms me down on a red flag day is to be prepared as I can be. All right, well, I don't see any other questions or comments coming through. We do have another training or hauling certification class going on this coming Saturday. Any of you who do volunteer for Napa CART, if you are not hauling certified yet, there will be an opportunity for you to have your vehicle inspected and to do a small obstacle course with your truck and trailer to be certified. So just a little side note there, if you haven't taken care of that, you can email info@Napa CART and we can get you signed up for that with Alan Harrison on Saturday.
Jamie Ross shared a tip in the chat. I can read it out if just everyone can hear it.
Sure.
It says, if you're someone with more cats than carriers or pocket pets or reptiles, pillowcases can work in a pinch in an evacuation until you get to a shelter.
That's a great recommendation. It's good, especially for reptiles and even for birds. And you can take your bird cage with you, by the way, if you are evacuating birds. That's a good one as well.
Perfect.
Another thing to think about for those of you that are either on the cart or that have pets at home is that one of the things that we face from the response side of things, working for Napa CART with Napa County Animal Shelter, is that our volunteers that go out under these hot conditions into burned over areas do need a large supply of personal protective equipment and equipment in the trucks to handle whatever they find at each site, whether that's an evacuation or shelter in place. One of our community partners, Jameson Humane, is hosting their Winapalooza event this coming Saturday evening. You can Google Winapalooza or you can go to our Napa CART website and you can look that up. That event is listed in our event page. And that is an opportunity to, if you're interested in supporting disaster response in Napa County, there will be a fund in need at the end of that event that will help Napa CART, Sonoma CART, and Solano CART to all invest in personal protective equipment for volunteers. So spread the word or share, if you can, share that information. Those of you that have an interest in doing something for the animal component, that's a great way that you can accomplish that. And again, all of our community partners, Napa Humane, Wine Country Animal Lovers, Napa County Animal Shelter, Sunrise Horse Rescue. These are amazing nonprofits in the Napa Valley that do this good work all year long. So they assist Napa CART in getting you all prepared. So if you happen to be members of those organizations or supporters of those organizations, thank you, because you're making an investment in your community when you support them. All right. I think, do you have anything else, Megan?
Yeah, Julie Atwood mentioned that there's another round of all hazards and fire line safety classes through Rescue Fast, and that's on the June 23rd and 24th. Okay,
and that's rescuefast.org. Again, for those of you that are interested in getting some more training about fire behavior, that's actually a very interesting course, the fire line course. We do require it for our volunteers who are going out into the field. And Julie is part of the Halter Project, and the Halter Project has been a tremendous ally in getting training and getting scholarships for training. So thank you, Julie and Tom, for all you've been doing for this effort as well.
There's a couple more. Someone just mentioned that having a feeding card at the barn, you know, of what your horse gets fed, is helpful, just because I said we have found that multiple Good Samaritans have overfed. So sometimes, you know, when they're in a shelter setting, they get overfed or fed different.
That's a very good point, and especially in horses. So when we talk about the problems that we face in the shelter, number one problem is going to be wounds and lacerations that happen during the evacuation. The number two problem that we face is colic. And colic is a GI disturbance in horses that can happen when they have a change in activity and a change in feed, or when the weather's really hot. And guess what? We have that whole trifecta when we put them in a shelter. So yes, having your horses or any of your pets feeding program and what they eat written down and ready to go is a huge way to reduce stress for that animal. Because if you have a dog or a cat in the shelter and you change their food because you don't know what they're on, and they develop diarrhea, or if they develop stomach pain and then they're not eating, and then that puts them at greater risk for other problems to develop. So being able to maintain some component of their normal routine goes a long way towards keeping them healthy and minimizing stress, whether they're in the small animal shelter or in the large animal shelter. And remember that even under the best circumstances, shelters stress animals, and stressed animals shed virus and swap infections just like stressed people do. And think of a daycare center. You've got all these different levels of immunity. They're all coming into one place. They're all within the same airspace, and lo and behold, you have a sick animal. And so although we encourage you to go to a shelter when you need to, part of the goal of tonight's talk is to encourage you to think about ways to keep your animals out of the shelter. And what that means is having a plan ahead of time, as we discussed, with someone else, someone like-minded who has a similar type of animal, who understands what that animal's going to need, and getting the animal there instead of to a group shelter.
There was one more thing. Nancy's kind of already answered this person, but just for the general group, are there positions within Napa CART to take calls or do more of admin type stuff if you can't be out rescuing pets?
You bet. So
yes, we need you.
What we always say is that we need every kind of help you can imagine in Napa CART. There's administrative help, there's help in the shelters, there's help in the field, there's running errands, there's making phone calls, there's getting donor support. So if you're on the talk tonight and you're interested in doing more for the animal component, send us a little email at info@napacart.org. Let us know what you're thinking and where your interest might lie, and then we can get you some additional information on how you can be valuable. In 2020, we had both the LNU complex fire, and then a few weeks later we had the glass fire, and we used hundreds of volunteers for the community that we could swear in on a daily basis, and we had them do the less dangerous parts of the work that are really, really important. A lot of the volunteer tracking and errand running and getting us supplies and helping us to have what we needed to respond. Those were critical roles that were played by community members who had no formal training yet with Napa CART. So we encourage you to think about what your role could be, and then reach out to us, and we're happy to meet you and to train you as you see fit, and we really appreciate it.
I think that was it for the chat.
All right. So everybody has a homework assignment. And what I always say is no due date, no do, right? So we're going to hang up tonight. We're going to go eat dinner. We're going to do our thing. But are you going to get this accomplished? So maybe set a reasonable deadline for yourself, and set a 2-week deadline. It's June, middle of June. We're coming into fire season. It's going to be a hard season for all of us. And have a little list in your mind of what you need to accomplish before July 4th. And let's see if you can get it done. If you can get it done, share it on Facebook. You can find us. We are Napa CART. We're on Facebook, and share your successes in preparedness, and you'll inspire others to do the same. And really, that's our goal with this presentation tonight, is just to get the word out that there's so much that you can do to positively influence the outcome for you and your pets. And if you sort of spread the word on that, then at the end of the day, our community just gets better and better at keeping each other safe. And that's really what we're all here to do. So show us what you did by July 4th. We would love to see it. All right, well, thanks for being here. Stay cool, and hopefully we get to see many of you again, and under non-emergent circumstances. Have a good evening.